The initial point was very much against market forces. These latest actions are effectively throwing a carrot to try and incentivize the Turkish lira depositors, which were in a panic. And that's why that's effectively what was happening. You were seeing a capitulation of Turkish lira depositors switching into foreign exchange, and the new policy throwing incentives at them to basically say, you're not going to do worse than the FX loss. You're always, it's the FX equivalent if the Turkish lira depreciates, is going to keep Turkish lira deposit holders in Turkish lira. They were already there, and now they've been given a guarantee. So those people are probably secured, and so it was a good crisis mitigation measure. Absolutely an unnecessary crisis. It was totally self-inflicted. We're much worse off than where we started. And now, though, Turkey, unfortunately, looks a little more like a Nigeria or a Lebanon in terms of the sustainability of the situation and the need for government intervention to make sure this works. This is going to be incredibly complicated to make sure we don't have huge imbalances. Effectively, it's like the US housing crisis. The Turkish story now will only really work if the Turkish lira behaves. If it does, it becomes a little bit virtuous, and it could be quite okay cyclically. But whenever the Turkish lira weakens, and we know that's absolutely going to happen at some stage, then the spiral becomes quite vicious because the liabilities of the state rise. And then again, you get into a situation where confidence be retained in the lira. So this is a super costly measure. Erdogan is throwing everything at it, largely to stabilize the situation, I would say, on his 18-month political view, rather than thinking what's the best outcome for the country.
Michael, Erdogan could have helped stabilise the market by committing to no further interest rate cuts. I mean, we saw some hope in the markets that would be the situation, and then that lira trade calmed down. But then obviously that was reversed when Erdogan suggested, well, we may get more cuts. What do you think the likely course is here? Do you think we will see the central bank slice interest rates further?
Well, I would be surprised because they've seen the pain, and he's already cut them enough. Real rates in Turkey are crazy low, 14% official policy rate. Everyone knows even with the stabilization, inflation is going to be 35%, 30, 40%. The minimum wage increase, if Erdogan was serious here, he wouldn't have announced a 50% minimum wage increase. And usually in most countries, minimum wages aren't crazy inflationary because they are on average, let's say 30 or 40% of wages. In Turkey, the minimum wage is literally 80% of the average wage. So Erdogan effectively dictates a national wage policy. So wages in January are going up 40 to 50% across the board. So this is and if they're lending at the current rate of 14%, so you can borrow in the teens somewhere, upper teens, you're in a situation where rates are extremely low in real terms. So he doesn't need to cut anymore. And I would just counter one thing you said. It wasn't about the central bank committing not to cut anymore. The rate was mispriced. Every Turk in the country knew that the rate they were getting in the bank account was nowhere near inflation. So that's what was causing the panic. For Erdogan to have won this via market forces, he would have had to capitulate on rates. And because he owns this low rate mentality so aggressively, it's no longer his son-in-law who he fired or a central bank governor after central bank governor who he fired. This was Erdogan explicitly saying, this is my policy. So he had too much pride and he was unwilling to back down. So this is the cost of having one person running a country with basically no one else having any checks and balances on him. And when that person goes a little off-piste, the whole country goes off-piste.
Morning, Michael, which is interesting. I think, as you point out, Erdogan owns the low interest rate story, which then raises a question that I know has been expressed by other economists, that what Erdogan was attempting to do was to try and effectively deliver something that looked like an interest rate hike through the back door, stabilizing the currency, thereby providing at least some ammunition to fight inflationary pressure. But you don't buy into that argument, I don't think.
That's a total misreading. I think an interest rate hike is all about what it does for economic activity. This was an interest rate hike only for depositors. Only. It's to keep money in Turkish lira. But they actually still have a very low interest rate. Now, if they go through and somehow raise the rate and don't allow credit to be issued at these sorts of levels, but the irony is stabilization is going to allow Erdogan to actually lend at the low rates that he was promising. So this is more dangerous because before the market wasn't going to let him lend because they didn't believe it. If we do get stabilization of the lira because of these huge carrots being thrown at Turkish lira depositors, and by the way, foreigners are not in the market. So foreigners were not the driving force here at all. It's not about stopping foreign panic. It was about stopping domestic panic. So he stopped domestic panic because domestic deposit holders will now be protected against the devaluation, but foreigners won't. So foreigners are still effectively being offered a 14% policy rate. So this is not going to bring any foreign money into the country. So it's not the interest rate that the foreign investors wanted, but also from a GDP growth perspective, this is incredibly, incredibly dovish if he gets away with this. And so and ultimately, simple message, it's inflationary. So yes, some people are saying, oh, at least we're not having the sheer hyperinflation associated with the currency absolutely melting down. But we already knew it was going to be 30, 35%. Throw on that if we get 3 or 4 months of calm, and we're going to end up seeing a lot of credit growth. And Erdogan is going to have to micromanage to make sure that credit growth doesn't go into crazy consumption, because the current account is almost unfinanceable if foreigners don't have an incentive to be in the country. And they don't. They absolutely don't. So Turkey is in the first phase where actually I agree with a lot of people that think about the current account generally and saying Turkey needs to balance the current account. Now it absolutely does, because who's going to fund it otherwise? But we're going to get a window where demand's going to be weak. Exports will come back because Turks are very capable exporters and they have a lot of spare capacity. And tourism hopefully will be very, very strong. So Erdogan, I think, has a 3 to 7 month window, let's call it, where the current account is going to be okay, and that's going to allow him to finance a little bit of recovery. But on balance, I think this is super, super inflationary, and I think this is at the same time you're going to have more sudden stops because there's not going to be that laxity where, as confidence improves, foreigners come in and help to fund the current account. That ain't going to happen this time around. This is a very, very short-term policy, or if he was serious about it, it's actually a recessionary policy is what he needs. But we know that's not what Erdogan's about. This was a populist solution. It was not an interest rate hike. It was a populist solution. He's giving a gift. He's spending the national wealth in order to give a gift to Turkish lira depositors to keep them in the Turkish lira. And that's huge from a net present value perspective. This is crazy costly for the Turkish economy. The markets and the country may not see it for the next 6 months, though, because actually the calm is abated. So this was a typical central bank throwing the kitchen sink at a problem. It worked, but actually Turkey can't afford the sink they just gave.